Hey there, it's Leona. Welcome to Zen Mindfulness Shodo. Today, we're gonna practice Shodo meditation while focusing on the Kanji character for 1000. So, let's begin a beautiful journey together. When you write a character, imagine a square about the size of the character that you are gonna write like this. First, I'm gonna write it. Then I'm gonna explain the points and tips for writing the character beautifully in detail. Alright, now I'm gonna explain the points and tips for writing this character beautifully. The first stroke starts from a point, a bit higher than, and to the left of, the center point of the top right square. Place the brush at about a 45-degree angle, while holding it straight up. Before moving the brush to the left, lightly push the brush towards the tip of it, in order to stabilize. After you stabilize the brush, at about a 30-degree angle, it checks downward to the left, towards the beginning point of the second stroke. While curving up just a tiny bit and getting thinner. This stroke might look like curving down, but it's actually curving up just a tiny bit. By checking downward to the left, while curving up just a tiny bit, this bottom line becomes straight instead of curved downward. Doing this widens the space between the first and second strokes, making the character look neater. If you were to make the first stroke with a downward curve, then this bottom line would end up lower, causing the space between the first and second strokes to become narrower, which doesn't look very clean and neat. Therefore, be careful to create the first stroke so that this bottom line remains straight without curving downward. Regarding the placement of the first stroke, if you look at the top line, the parts above and below the middle vertical line are almost the same length, but looking at the bottom line, the part above the middle vertical line is longer than the part below, so the first stroke may appear slightly shifted to the right. However, this slight shift doesn't look too unbalanced for the overall character, in my opinion. However, if the first stroke is placed much more to the right or to the left than this, it would make the overall balance of the character look poor. The ideal is for the first stroke to be horizontally centered in the square box and directly above the middle part of the second stroke. However, achieving this ideal positioning may or may not happen by chance, so if the first stroke ends up slightly shifted to the left or right instead of perfectly centered, don't worry too much about it. Instead, adjust the positioning of the second and third strokes to maintain an overall better balance for the entire character. From the end point of the first stroke, move the brush in the direction of checking downward to the left. And the second stroke starts from a point a bit to the left of the middle of the left half of the middle horizontal line. Place the brush at about a 45-degree angle, like the beginning point of the first stroke, while holding it straight up. Before moving the brush to the right, lightly push the brush towards the tip of it and stabilize the brush. As you can see from this bottom line, the second stroke is curving up like this. It moves to the right while curving up, until the middle vertical line is in the middle of the stroke. So the space to the left of the starting point of the second stroke, and the space to the right of the end point of the stroke are almost the same size. If you write it so that the stroke gradually gets thicker as it moves to the right. In other words, if the right half looks thicker than the left half, the overall character will look more stable. At the end point, just like at the start point, lightly push the brush towards the tip of it, without moving the brush on the paper. This prevents the jagged edges of the brush from appearing in the line, allowing it to look smooth like this. If you immediately lift the brush off the paper after moving it to the right, the jagged edges of the brush will show up here. On the other hand, if you press down too hard with the brush at the end point, it will create a lump here. And if you linger too long, the ink will bleed and make the line thicker. Therefore, after moving the brush to the right, stop lightly about 1 second with the same brush pressure you were using, no more. That's the key point for ending the stroke neatly. From the end point of the second stroke, move the brush upward to the left like this. And the third stroke starts from the middle vertical line, under the first stroke. For the starting point of the third stroke, you can either lightly touch just the tip of the brush to the first stroke, or leave a very slight gap between them. Whichever you prefer is fine. However, if you start from a point slightly higher than the second stroke, leaving too much space between the beginning point and the first stroke, the overall balance of the character will look poor and not very neat. So while you can leave a slight gap, it's better to have just a very small space where it's barely detached from the first stroke. Doing this will make the overall character look more unified and beautiful. At the starting point, like the other starting points, place the brush at about a 45-degree angle while holding it straight up, and lightly push the brush towards the tip of it, and stabilize the brush. After stabilize the brush until the height where the space below the end point of the stroke and the space above the starting point of the first stroke are almost the same size. It moved straight down on the middle vertical line. Gradually lift the brush off the paper, and the tip of the brush creates this pointy part at the very end. For the end point, you can write it so that it's pointy like this, or alternatively, like the end point of the second stroke, you can move the brush straight and then stop for about 1 second, lightly pushing the brush towards the tip of it to finish. Feel free to write it whichever you prefer. Personally, when I write the kanji character 1000 with the brush, I gradually lift the brush off the paper towards the end, making the line come to a point like this. This vertical stroke, as you can see from the line on the left, is created while curving very slightly to the right. Doing this gives it more stability and makes the vertical stroke appear straight. If we were to curve to the left instead, it would throw off the overall balance of the character. So the key point here is that even though it may look like a straight line, it's actually made with a slight rightward curve, which makes it appear straight and well balanced. As I said earlier, when the first stroke is not positioned in the center of the second stroke, it makes the overall balance of the character look poor. I'll write examples of that here. To make it clear, I intentionally wrote extreme examples. In the upper example, the starting point of the first stroke itself is slightly shifted to the right, and the length is also short. So, if this is the middle vertical line, the end point will be around here. Therefore, the starting point of the third stroke is not around the middle of the first stroke, and that makes the overall balance of the character look poor. In the bottom example, if this is the middle vertical line, then the first stroke starts from the left side of the middle vertical line. So overall, the first stroke is shifted too far to the left, and the middle vertical line doesn't pass through the middle of the first stroke, which makes the overall balance of the character look poor. And there's a space above the beginning point of the third stroke. Another key point is the angle of the first stroke. This example is also close. I'm gonna write example here. Even in this example, where the first stroke is positioned around the center of the second stroke, unlike these two previous examples, if the angle is closer to the middle vertical line, compared to the proper example with the angle closer to the middle horizontal line, it makes the overall character look less stable and balanced. Therefore, try to make the angle of the first stroke closer to the middle horizontal line. but not completely parallel to the middle horizontal line or the second stroke. If you can create the first stroke at an angle between this angle and the middle horizontal line, the character will look more balanced and beautiful, in my opinion. In addition to the position and angle of the first stroke, the curve also affects the overall look of the character. I'm gonna write an example here. If you make the first stroke with a downward curve like this, the space between the first and the second strokes become too narrow, and the overall character doesn't look very neat. So, the key point is to write it so that this bottom line appears straight. To achieve this, as I mentioned earlier, when checking downward to the left, check it with a slight upward curved stroke. This will make the bottom line straighter and this space bigger, resulting in a cleaner and neater looking character overall. The last key point is the height of the third stroke. For example, if you start the third stroke by attaching it directly to the first stroke like this, the character for 1000 will look like this. On the other hand, if you start the third stroke from a point slightly higher than the second stroke, the character will take on this kind of shape. In the example on the left, the approximately 45-degree angled part of the starting point of the third stroke is on the first stroke and not visible. In the example on the right, there is too much space between the first stroke and the starting point of the third stroke. Therefore, if this is the starting point of the third stroke, either attach only the tip of the brush to the first stroke, or leave a tiny space, about the thickness of this pen, between the first and third strokes to create the character 1000 more elegantly. Keep these points and techniques in mind when you practice. The key points and tips for writing kanji beautifully, as explained in the video, are concisely summarized in this book. Additionally, easily understandable Zen mindsets and philosophical messages are shared in this book. For those who want to practice directly in this book, I've also prepared a workbook. The writing tips and techniques are the same as in the Zen Mindfulness Shodo book. Each page allows you to practice one character. If you're interested, please see the description. When you practice with a brush, I recommend that you place a few pieces of paper under the page that you're writing on, so that the ink doesn't bleed onto the page under it. Alright, let's get started. Before you start writing, take a deep breath and clear your mind. Slowly breathe in as much air as you can through your nose, and exhale all the negative emotions that you've been holding until this moment through your mouth. When you're mentally ready to write, you can start writing. Take the starting point, end point, the angle of the stroke, and the direction of the curve. After that, without hesitation, aim for the end point and move the brush smoothly. Try to write slower than you normally write, putting your heart and soul into each stroke. However, if you move the brush too slowly, the ink will bleed, and the lines will become thicker in areas where you don't want them to be thicker. And if you move the brush too quickly, the ink will fade, and the lines will become thinner in areas you don't want them to be thinner. Or the ink will disappear midway through, making the strokes shorter than you want them to be. So concentrate on finding the right speed. Once you've finished writing the character, look at the character as a whole and think about what changes you should make next in order to make it look even more beautiful. Of course, you don't have to take all the tips and points that I've told you and copy my way of writing the character. Trust your own sense of beauty and adjust accordingly. It's important that you're satisfied with the shapes of the characters you write. So, please use my tips and points as ideas and hints for adjusting the shape of the character to your sense of beauty. Of course, you can't change the shape so much that it no longer looks like a character. If you notice that you're thinking about something else while writing, immediately refocus on what you're writing. By repeating this exercise, you'll be able to notice when your attention starts to turn to something unrelated to your current action and gradually improve your concentration and self-control. You can also build your patience with this practice. So, let's practice together. It's just natural that we are unable to create perfectly satisfying strokes every time. Instead of blaming yourself for not being able to make strokes that you want, try praising yourself for taking on difficult challenges. On this channel, I not only share tips and points for writing Japanese characters beautifully with a pen and a brush in both English and Japanese, I also practice Zen Mindfulness Shodo meditation that focuses all of our attention on the present moment. If you want to learn how to write other characters, or if you want to use this channel to learn Japanese language, or if you want to keep practicing Zen Mindfulness Shodo meditation with me, please subscribe to my channel and click the bell mark so you get a notification as soon as I upload a new video. If you liked this video, or if you thought the information was useful, please hit the thumbs up button. Alright, let's learn and practice together again in my next video. Thank you for watching.